What the Western media will not tell you about why Iran really wants the bomb. Let me start with a simple question. One I guarantee you have never heard a CNN anchor ask, not once, not even by accident. What if Iran does not want nuclear weapons for deterrence? What if they're not trying to be the next North Korea, a rogue state using the bomb as a bargaining chip to stay alive at the negotiating table? What if the people actually running Iran, not the diplomats paraded before the cameras, but the ideologues inside the IRGC and the clerical establishment genuinely believe that a nuclear exchange would be welcome, not just survivable? Welcome. I know, that sounds deranged, and here is the thing it is. But it is also the theology. So let us talk about it, because apparently somebody has to. The 12th Imam, a brief theology lesson for adults who skipped it. Iran is not just Islamic. It is specifically 12er Shia Islam, a theological tradition built around the belief in 12 divinely appointed imams, descendants of the Prophet Muhammad, who held the legitimate spiritual and political authority over all of Islam. The 12th and final one was Muhammad al-Mahdi, born around 868 CE. His father, the 11th Imam, died in 874 CE, and the child, somewhere between 5 and 9 years old, depending on the source, did not die. According to 12er doctrine, he entered what they call occultation. He is hidden, alive, waiting, the hidden Imam. Now, here is where this stops being an interesting history lesson and starts being a geopolitical catastrophe waiting to unfold. The Mahdi is prophesied to return, not in some vague, symbolic, metaphorical sense, literally return in the flesh. And the conditions that must precede his return, according to classical 12er sources, the world must first be overwhelmed by injustice, tyranny, chaos, and moral corruption. A period called fitna. The worse things get, the closer the Mahdi is. I want you to sit with that for a second. The worse things get, the closer the Mahdi is. From patient waiting to active engineering. For most of Shia history, the response to this belief was intizar, patient waiting. Live righteously. Trust that God will decide when the Mahdi returns. Do not presume to hasten divine timing. Reasonable enough for a 1,200-year-old theological tradition. Then came the 1979 Iranian Revolution, and everything changed. Ayatollah Khomeini introduced a concept called velayat-e-faqih, the guardianship of the jurist. The idea that in the Mahdi's absence, a senior Islamic scholar should govern in his place, preparing the way. Iran's entire constitutional structure is built on this concept. The supreme leader is not just a political figure. He's explicitly a placeholder for the hidden imam. That is not a metaphor. That is in the Iranian constitution. And then came Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, and political Mahdism. When eschatology goes nuclear, during Ahmadinejad's presidency, between 2005 to 2013, a more activist strain of this theology emerged publicly. He ended speeches with prayers for the Mahdi's swift return. He explicitly linked Iran's confrontation with America, the great Satan, and Israel, the little Satan, to the prophesied conditions preceding the hidden imam's reappearance. IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the true power behind Iran's government, published materials framing their military role as literally building the Mahdi's army. Missiles were painted with Mahdist slogans. The nuclear program was discussed in certain hardliner circles, not merely as a deterrent, but as a tool of eschatological preparation. Here is what that means in plain English for anyone who got lost in the vocabulary. Some of the most powerful people inside the Iranian government believe that triggering a global catastrophe, potentially including a nuclear exchange, would help bring about the return of the Mahdi and the establishment of global Islamic governance. Mutually assured destruction is not a deterrent to people who view mutual destruction as prophecy fulfillment. I do not say this to be inflammatory. I say this because this is what their own documents say. Quinn's Law #5 arrives right on time. Jim Quinn's fifth law of liberalism states that when liberalism conflicts with reality, reality must give way. Western foreign policy has spent 40+ years insisting that Iran is a rational state actor that will eventually be appeased into good behavior with enough diplomatic engagement and pallets of cash. Reality has repeatedly, patiently, and rather loudly disagreed. The 1979 hostage crisis, the bombings of the US Marine barracks in Beirut, Iran-backed Hezbollah, 1983, the Khobar Towers, Decades of funding Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, 4 American service members killed during Operation Epic Fury. But sure, maybe this round of diplomacy will be the one that works. Perhaps this time they will trade their eschatological mission for some sanctions relief. I am certain of it. I am not certain of it. They have a fatwa against it argument. I know what you are about to say. Supreme Leader Khamenei issued a fatwa against nuclear weapons. Iran says its program is entirely peaceful. The IAEA inspectors, when they were occasionally allowed to do their jobs, found this, then that, then were surprised by the next revelation. Here is a useful exercise. Count how many times in Islamic jurisprudence a fatwa issued under conditions of taqiyya, religiously sanctioned deception to protect the faith from enemies, is considered binding. The answer is that it is not. If the cause is deemed to be protecting Islam from the great Satan, the religious calculus changes. I am not saying every Iranian citizen or even every Iranian cleric subscribes to the nuke our way to the Mahdi theology. Traditional quietist Shia scholars have always pushed back on this. The Twelver tradition worldwide, including among Iraqi and Lebanese Shia, does not universally embrace this activist political Mahdism. But the people running the IRGC, the people who actually have their hands on the centrifuges, the people who, when they were told by the United States and Israel that their nuclear facilities had been struck during Operation Epic Fury and Khamenei was killed, those people did not dissolve in grief and suddenly seek peace. They immediately began calculating how to reconstitute, because the mission is not survival. The mission is the Mahdi. What this means for American policy and why nobody wants to say it. Here is the uncomfortable reality that the State Department cocktail circuit refuses to acknowledge. You cannot negotiate an eschatological mission away with a treaty. You cannot sanction someone out of a theological worldview that views suffering as confirmation of righteousness and chaos as a positive sign of the approaching end of days. Every administration, Republican and Democrat alike, has operated on the assumption that Iran behaves like a rational geopolitical actor that simply needs the right incentive structure. The Obama administration gave them $150 billion plus $1.8 billion in cash in the dead of night on pallets in a plane. Biden's autopen unfroze $6 billion in Iranian assets. And every single time, Iran spent that money on regional proxy warfare and nuclear development. Because rational state actor deterrence theory does not apply to a government structured around waiting for the apocalypse to summon a messiah, this is not a complex strategic concept. It is actually remarkably simple once you simply read what they say they believe, which is perhaps the most damning indictment of 40 years of Western Iran policy. We refused to read. A word on the 45 communist goals and institutional blindness. Congressman Albert S. Herlong Jr. read into the congressional record on the 10th of January, 1963, volume 109, a list of 45 communist goals for America. Goal 15, capture one or both of the political parties in the United States. Goal 32, support any socialist movement to give centralized control over any part of the culture. I bring this up because the same institutional blindness that allowed ideological capture of American academia and media is the identical mechanism that prevents serious people in positions of power from saying plainly, Iran's leadership contains a faction that believes nuclear conflict might hasten the return of a prophesied messiah, and conventional deterrence theory does not account for this variable. When you cannot say the obvious thing out loud because it makes a particular theological tradition look dangerous, you end up with 40 years of failed Iran policy. The truth is not Islamophobic. The truth is just true. The bottom line. Operation Epic Fury has set back Iran's nuclear program substantially. Khamenei is gone. The IRGC infrastructure has taken significant damage. But ideology does not die in an airstrike. The political Mahdist faction inside Iran still exists. The theological infrastructure that produced it, the belief that chaos precedes the Mahdi, that Iran's revolutionary mission is to create the conditions for his return that is still in every seminary, every IRGC training manual, every Friday sermon, from the hardliners who will be maneuvering to fill the power vacuum Khamenei's death created. This is a theology problem. It requires a theology-informed response, not just military strikes and sanctions, but a comprehensive strategy that actively supports the traditional quietist Shia clergy who have always opposed political Mahdism, empowers the Iranian people who are overwhelmingly sick of this regime, and refuses to pretend that another nuclear deal is anything other than buying time for people who welcome the end of time. Save this post. Share it. Because you will hear someone in the next 6 months say that Iran just needs more diplomacy. And you will need receipts. But what do I know? I am only a science teacher, an Army combat medic who spent enough time studying theology, eschatology, and regional geopolitics to understand that when a government literally structures its constitution around a messianic return prophecy and simultaneously enriches uranium, maybe just maybe those two facts are not unrelated.